Hello, 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 hello. I'm Eddie Obeng, and this is How. Daily, I bring you a different way to make your world work differently. How, getting stuff done. How to make sure you think clearly. How to get your colleagues to align with you. How to get the world to move in the direction you would like it to. That's what How Daily is about. And I bring you a different people engagement tool, performance enhancement tool every single time I come on here. Today, I have a treat for you. It's about problem solving. So let's jump onto Cube, and I'm going to share with you PODE so you can have a look. So welcome to Cube, where actually this Cube doesn't have a window. And normally I say the sun is always shining, where there are offices next door. This is the workshop generator Cube. There's a podcast somewhere you can read about how you use this to transform from what you normally do to turn it into a place where turn your session to a session which will work on Cube. Let's start with problems. What is a problem? I've got lots of problems, people say. But what is a problem? A problem is something which gets in the way of your goals or your vision of how things should be. So if your arm hurts, which mine does, then you have a problem because I don't want it to hurt, it gets in the way. If you're trying to deliver or achieve something and something gets in the way, 8 o'clock, my clock's striking, then obviously that's also a problem. So a problem is something which gets in the way of what you want to do or doesn't match your vision. So let's look at how you solve a problem, because people don't often discuss the ways to solve a problem. There are millions of ways of solving a problem. So when I was a tutor at Ashridge, I remember we had a sort of all hands town hall meeting, and the CEO at the time was explaining how we were a residential executive education college. We had 180 bedrooms, and he was talking about to the general staff, and he was complaining about utilization. In other words, we weren't using up all the beds in all the rooms all year, so the utilization was low. Really what that meant was we weren't getting people staying for courses. Really what that meant was the bottom line was tight, but he described it in terms of utilization. And one really helpful person put his hand up and said, well, if the problem is utilization, in other words, we're not using all the bedrooms, why don't we close some of the bedrooms? Then we'll have fewer bedrooms, then we'll have better utilization, which makes perfect sense. They'd solve the problem. So that's one way of solving the problem. The reality is the business performance was still pretty grim, but they didn't close the bedrooms. But do you see what I mean? There are many ways of solving the problem, and that's one of the ones which I've just described here. You can change the way you measure the problem. That's one way of solving problems. The second is you can go, actually, we were going to grow by 5%. We've downgraded that it's 2%. So all of a sudden, the problem goes away because you change the goals, so it's no longer a problem. You can do it thoroughly. You can map out, there's a pet called the bubble diagram, which maps all the causalities and all the things which come together in order to create the scenario which you don't enjoy at the moment. And so that's like a comprehensive understanding. So you can map the whole set of causalities and you can then figure out how to solve the whole problem. That's a lot of work. Very few people do that. It's really hard unless you use the bubble diagram to map an entire problem. Because if you have people in conversation, they'll say, there's a problem. Then they'll argue, is there a problem? Then one person will say, this is the cause. Then someone else said, no, this is the cause. The third person said, this is the cause. And nobody ever checks. So the loudest voice wins. So usually we don't see the whole problem. So that's the normal way people do things. They peck at a problem. The other one we can do is we can delay the action. One of my friends is going for tests. He's not feeling very well. They always send him for tests. They take blood samples and bloods, and basically, I had a boss who explained that weighing the pig doesn't make it any fatter. You just keep measuring it. Let's have a look at this data. Let's have a look at that data. Doesn't resolve it, but it looks like you're doing something about the problem. In my country where I work, most of the budget or a lot of the budget on health is actually just spent on tests or weighing the pig. You can cancel out the symptoms. I'm feeling cold. I'm going to put on a jumper. That's another way of doing it. You haven't solved the problem of why you're cold. It could just be you've left the window open, but you put on a jumper. So you can cancel out the symptoms. You can add another symptom that trumps the others. So when a child is crying because they've knocked their knee or something, you give them a sweet. And so this other symptom makes them forget how bad their knee is. So that's another way of solving a problem. Other ways of solving a problem, you can turn it into an opportunity. They always say, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Actually, if life gives you lemons, you should probably make sure the stock market is rising in terms of lemon prices. And then, no, I'm joking. But yeah, make lemonade. So how do I turn the fact that the business performance is down into an opportunity? Well, what I could do is I could share it with everyone, and then we can all start to work as a cooperative group. Everyone will be proud of the outcome, etc. So you could do that as well. You can actually remove the root causes, especially if you've done a bubble diagram, you close the window, whatever it is, you find out what the root cause is, and usually there's more than one, and you deal with all of them, not just one of them. Or you could do something which makes your boss notice and that you're doing something. So sales are down. Well, I'll tell you what, we've launched this new sales initiative. Everyone's really happy, all the stakeholders, and then they forget about the problem and then it's gone away. You can remove or neutralize the root causes and map the future to make sure you haven't, this should say there, to make sure you haven't created new ones, because it's quite common to have unexpected consequences of any action. So it's like this one, but it's like turbocharged. Let's map the future. There's a pet called future mapping, so go and have a look at that. Look at the pet called bubble diagram. So there are many ways in which you can solve a problem. I'm going to share with you one way, which is called PODE. Okay? So the way it works is like this. You take it at face value. There is a problem. Let's have a look at what this problem might be. So this is my favorite problem diagram. It's a problem. You can see it's a problem, okay? And so for the problem, PODE is like one of these, like a pet's navigator. You bring together lots of pets in order to be able to solve your issues and drive through PODE. So for example, one which might work is barriers. So barriers, look that one up. It'll help us quickly find out what our mission is, if only we had, if only we didn't have, and that helps you start to address the problem. Or you might be a little bit more organized, and you might just start to think about, detail. So here I have a list of key software failures 2024. I don't know why I chose 2024, and it's just one after the other, and you can see the size of the challenges, the impacts which people had. And the causes were always very, very small, misconfigured update, Volkswagen messing up their software, etc. And it just goes on. And what you find is that the causes are quite small. But it's fascinating to look at the problems and the nature of the problems, why they happened. But that's really a way of thinking about it. And things like barriers will help you quickly identify what could be the issue that you're facing. So that would be one. Then the next trick is think about the outcome. What do I want as an outcome? The thing about the different ways of solving problems is that you will get different outcomes. If you just give the child a sweet, their knee still hurts, the thing they tripped over is still there. So is that the outcome you want? So again, let's think about the outcomes. So generally, look into the future. I saw this and made me laugh because lots of companies have fired everyone because of AI, and then all of a sudden they've gone, oh, okay, oh my goodness, we fired everybody. Now we need to hire them back. So things like 2020, the PET 2020, where you really describe the future, what people will be saying, how they're behaving, what the artifacts are, what the stakeholder groups will be saying. That sort of PET will help you clearly define and understand what's coming next, so that you can do it. So have a look at 2020 as a PET. But also in terms of outcome, think about how you're going to measure it. I tend to use on balance. Have a look at that because it gives you measures you can trust. It gives you internal measures. It gives you external measures. It gives you relative measures. It gives you absolute measures. So you can really tell if something's going on, not let's just close some of the rooms so we get better utilization. That's a relative measure, but the absolute measure is there's still no one coming. You can then move into discussion and analysis. And on this one, I'll just run through three. The first is, if you're going to do analysis and discussion, don't just weigh the pig. Use knowledge. Basically, question plus data equals information. So figure out exactly what the questions are, not let's do bloods. What's the question? What's the question? The question is your pancreas working? Okay, what data do we need? A specific test. No, let's measure them all and see what the indicators say. That is just dumb to me. Anyway, so because unless you have a before and after, you can't tell whether anything's moved anyway. You're comparing it to other people or a database, and that's even madder because all of us are different. So use something like this, or knowledge QDO, which is basically making sure that you're clear on what the question is, the data, and who's going to provide it. Make sure you spin-cast. Why? Because spin-casting brings in everybody into the conversation. So it makes sure you're more likely to get a good discussion. And then end with the 5 Ps. So what is it we're trying to do to get rid of the problem, achieve our outcome? The reason why we have to do this is this. These are the principles. That's what's in. That's what's out. We've looked at the people. This is what we're doing to initiate it. This is what we're doing to deliver it. And this is how we think the outcome will look. and then you go into execution, and execution usually falls into things like sticky steps. If you worked with sticky steps, you'll know that basically you can take any problem and fix it as sticky steps. And then you probably want also with the sticky steps to have a timeline. So that's the second part of sticky steps. So by using this idea of problem, knowing that there are multiple problems and being very clear on what type of problem it is, being very clear on what sort of outcome you're hoping for, making sure your metrics are going to make sense, collecting the right data, analyzing it properly, not just messing around with data, involving people, being clear on the outcome of the analysis, and then actively executing. That's what PODE is about. And if you go to the PET, it will give you some ideas of PETs you can use. I've just put some other ones on here. But think it through, use it as a PETs navigator. Get on with it now, because I'm sure your life is good, but I'm sure you also have a couple of problems. So let's actually have a look at what those problems mean and how you could get rid of them. I'm Eddie Obeng. If you haven't subscribed to the newsletter on LinkedIn, do that. Otherwise, get onto Spotify, YouTube, and subscribe. There are hundreds of other pets which will transform your life. Your life will never be so good as it will be with all the pets. I'll see you again. Bye.